Philippians 2, verses 12 through 16 in the Christian Standard Bible say, "Therefore, my dear friends, just as you have always obeyed, so now, not only in my presence, but even more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who is working in you both to will and to work according to his good purpose. Do everything without grumbling and arguing, so that you may be blameless and pure, children of God who are faultless in a crooked and perverted generation, among whom you shine like stars in the world by holding firm to the word of life. Then I can boast in the day of Christ that I didn't run or labor for nothing." St. Paul writes here to the church of Philippine about working together with God for their salvation. The scripture tells us, the reader, to refrain from grumbling and arguing. How can avoiding this kind of rhetoric add to our salvation?
From grumbling and arguing. That's a good question. Let's see. I think oftentimes I think when we get so caught up in theological debate and arguing, it's a way to kind of ignore our responsibility to like actually do stuff in the world. So it's like kind of hard to love your neighbor if you and I are just like sitting here arguing with each other all day, right? You know, arguing over, I don't know, big theological words or the doctrine of the Trinity or atonement theories or whatever. I mean, these things are important. We could talk about them. But ultimately, if we're just constantly, I don't know, arguing, we can use it as a reason to not actually then go out and love our neighbor, feed the poor, clothe the naked, etika kind of thing. So, yeah. And as far as, I guess, contributing to salvation, I'm inclined to believe that salvation, at the very least, includes life right here and right now. And so living into Christ likeness or something like that is how I would describe salvation. So participating in what God is doing in the world is, at least in part, salvation. So if we stop arguing and get at it, then there we go. I don't know. That's just off the dome.
There we go.
We'll see.
That's how we do it around here. It's off the dome. So today we're talking about Theopoetics. We are here with Josh Patterson, good friend. We love this guy. Josh isn't able to make it because we're recording past his bedtime. He's just an old man. It is 8 p.m. So, Josh Patterson, the one, the only, from the Rethinking Faith podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good, man. Yeah, nothing to complain about. Just hanging out. Just had a pretty delicious dinner with my partner Noelle, and ready to rock and roll. It's good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been since last year, beer camp.
Probably, yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
Are you coming around this year?
Oh yeah, of course.
Oh yeah, heck
yeah. Naturally. I get introduced by someone else, but he's gone. He's sleeping. I'm TJ Blackwell, the hostess with the mostest. I'm usually the co-hostess with the co-mostest, but not today. Check us out on the Anazal Ministries podcast network website. The link is below for shows like ours. You can also pay for the network on Apple Podcasts. You can get extra content from every show in the podcast, and chat with us in our Discord server, also in the notes. It's a super fun way to get to know us better and for us to talk to you. So you've done this show before, Josh, and you know Josh, and you know me. So Josh's favorite form of unity, I'm still torn, is silliness. So okay. We always start with our silly question, and today's silly question I will answer first. But if any one of your appliances were to begin speaking, which one would you most not want it to be? And I'll go first because I have for me, it's my stove. My stove has been broken for a couple of months. It just doesn't work, and we just, instead of getting our apartment people to fix it, we just like got out our big camping stove and have been using that. But like, if it speaks, that not only means that it is alive, but it's probably going to be really angry that we let it be dead for so long.
Nice.
Yeah. But what about you?
Appliance that when it went to come alive. Man, stove is a good one. I don't know. Maybe maybe the laundry machine. Our washing machine is like this weird combo where it's a washer and a dryer all in one, which seems cool at first until it's not. It's not the greatest thing in the world, and the pump on it has broke multiple times. And so I have learned how to repair washing machines out of necessity. And I have replaced the freaking pump on that thing at least 4 or 5 times now. And so I'd be probably, if that one started talking, I don't know how kind I would be. And so in turn, it would probably make my washing machine be even less efficient. And so, because I would be a jerk right back.
Yeah.
And so I don't want that to come alive and get me ticked off and, start arguing with it, because it's already a pain in the butt.
Yeah, that sucks. I thought those things were super cool.
I mean, they look super cool, and like when it works, it works. But knock on wood, the pump that's in there now has been working for a hot second. So
I don't know if I would have said that. I don't know if I would have said that.
It's risky business, but I'm gonna, I don't know, trust it to the Lord or something like that.
Yeah. So recently we did the roundtable episode where we discussed the church's response to politics. You weren't on that one. You're a busy guy. Josh goes to bed before you're usually available to do stuff. Right now in the U.S., we live in an extremely polarized time with election year upon us and the Olympics. A lot of church leaders are pointing to Dietrich Bonhoeffer recently in support of their side. You are like the biggest Bonhoeffer fan I know. Both sides are pointing to him in support of their positions. Josh, why do you think this is?
Yeah, so I am a fan of Bonhoeffer, but I'll preface it by saying I am no Bonhoeffer scholar. So take what I say with a grain of salt. But there is a Bonhoeffer scholar who I really like named Jeffrey Pugh. He's been on Rethinking Faith before, and he uses this phrase that I love. He says Bonhoeffer is like a spiritual Rorschach test, where people kind of pick and choose different aspects or different writings from Bonhoeffer, and then kind of appropriate them to their own, side or perspective. Similar to what people do with Martin Luther King Jr., right? People take
the Bible.
And the Bible. Right? Maybe it's just texts in general.
Just everything.
But like, for example, Discipleship, or The Cost of Discipleship, is one of Bonhoeffer's really popular ones, and Life Together. These two tend to be picked up by more conservative people, politically conservative, but also more theologically conservative, maybe within like evangelicalism, because Bonhoeffer is very clear and direct in his writing in those books. And what people often miss is the context in which Bonhoeffer's writing. Bonhoeffer is like in exile he's not welcome in the church because he was actively speaking out against the Nazis, which were a thing. Bonhoeffer is a German. And so that context is often missed in reading something like Life Together and Discipleship, which is, one reason I think it gets picked up. But then in general, another reason that maybe more conservative people are picking up Bonhoeffer is because they're tying what Bonhoeffer did when Bonhoeffer joined the Nazi resistance, the conspiracy to kill Adolf Hitler, which, by the way, Bonhoeffer never justified. Bonhoeffer actually used kind of like Christological language when talking about this. He said, basically, he was like taking the sins of his country upon himself by joining the conspiracy. So he wasn't justifying his actions. But more conservative people have picked this up similarly to like what happened in January 6th, and are using it as like, this is our Bonhoeffer moment to overthrow the liberals and make America great again, which, by the way, this is all language that Hitler used. Hitler said, I'm going to make Germany, great again. Hitler said, we're going to clear our country of all the liberals, of all the progressive ideology and degenerate living and the arts and all this kind of stuff. And so he gets, Bonhoeffer gets kind of spun in that way. But then the more progressive side will pick up Bonhoeffer and say, like, look, guys, no, Bonhoeffer is standing against the Nazis. This is why he was exiled. He was arguing with the church because the church was supporting Hitler. Hitler had a theology. Hitler preached theology. He used Christianity as a tool to rile people up. And so Bonhoeffer was like, German nationalism, not a good thing. I don't want that. And so then, the more progressive side, I guess, is kind of using it to speak out against Christian nationalism and championing Bonhoeffer in that regard. So, I mean, those are just, two ways that I see it. But again, not a Bonhoeffer scholar. Go listen to Jeffrey Pugh. Or I know mutual friend Trip Fuller is working on a huge Bonhoeffer project right now. It's going to involve a book. It's going to involve a kind of like very highly edited podcast, kind of like the rise and fall of Mars Hill or what he did with the Emergent Church. And I think anyway, that's the come. So if you want more on Bonhoeffer, I'd go check out those people who know way more than I do.
Man, Tripp's work ethic is insane.
It is.
It's crazy.
The dude. Yeah. So shout out Tripp.
Shout out Tripp. We love that guy. So both sides are pointing to Bonhoeffer. Is it possible that understanding him in his full context could bring the church closer together rather than just providing out of context ammunition for either side?
Yeah, I mean, I think so, because Bonhoeffer, I mean, yes, but I think it would take humility, but also I have, this is putting my cards on the table. I have a very strong feeling about who tends to be more right about a contextualized Bonhoeffer. And it's not the Eric Metaxases of the world, who he's an example of appropriating Bonhoeffer within evangelicalism. And his book on Bonhoeffer has been just like straight up outright rejected by like the overwhelming majority of Bonhoeffer scholars because it's just not accurate. But I think if we can come together in humility, and if we're willing to forego our politics for something like unity in Christ and center on Jesus rather than on am I a Democrat or a Republican, then I say yes. I think Bonhoeffer can speak to and challenge both of us. I think Bonhoeffer can, hopefully humble us a bit, whether you're more progressive or more conservative. He's speaking to both sides. I don't think anyone can rightly just fully claim him. And so maybe humility and focusing on Jesus as the center could be a way to come together around that.
Right. So mutual friend, you mentioned one. I'm mentioning another one, Nick Polk. He's been on our show a few times in the last month, and he's credited you for getting him into theopoetics. What can you tell us about this form of theology? Because I'm not a theopoeticist.
Yeah, sure. So shout out to Nick Polk. I love Nick. So theopoetics is something I've come to, I guess, a bit more recently. It is kind of, if you think about it for a second, it's almost exactly what it sounds like. It's theology and poetry. So it kind of recognizes that theology is contextual. So just like Bonhoeffer was doing theology in a very specific context that informed his theology, you and I, we have our own context. We have our own experiences that we bring to the table. We have our own perspectives and things. And so everybody, so theopoetics is kind of, if you think about it for a second, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's theology and poetry. And so it recognizes that all theology is contextual. So just like Bonhoeffer had a perspective that he was writing out of, you and I also both have our own perspectives. We have our own context. We have our own past experiences. We live in different states, right? We probably have different opinions about some things. So theopoetics recognizes that about theology, that is contextual, and believes that theology then can be written and reinterpreted over time as our contexts shift and change. So it's not as dogmatic. People tend not to, be putting forth like ontological truth claims or something like that, but rather writing using theological language, but it's more fluid. It has more of a poetic nature to it. So it's not that it's not true, but maybe it's a little bit more true because it leans into things like beauty and value, something like that. So yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So who got you into theopoetics, or what is it that gets you excited to talk about and want to share about it?
So let's see. I'm gonna write this down so I can answer both parts. So who and basically why or what.
Yeah.
So the who that got me into it, I would probably say Catherine Keller. She is a process relational theologian. She will be at Beer Camp, which I'm very excited about. She's actually on this beer label that is hanging up behind me for the Process Party beer. I'm talking to her at the table on that label, which I was very excited about. But yeah, so she is a mastermind in the worlds of theopoetics. I mean, her book, actually right here I have it. It's called Face of the Deep, A Theology of Becoming. It's just like a retelling of Genesis, and it's beautiful. It's wonderful. And so she was really an introduction into it. And then more recently, I've been really into radical theology. I kind of took a deep dive into that. And specifically, I've been reading a lot of John Caputo, and he does a lot of theopoetic work within radical theology. You can actually, those two are kind of linked pretty nicely. And then one other, process thinking in general plays nicely with theopoetics. And so any of the, process thinkers. But as far as the why or the what, I think as somebody who is a deep thinker that is probably a bit too obsessed with theology and philosophy, and who has experienced what is colloquially referred to as deconstruction, theopoetics is just attractive to me because it has an air of humility about it, and it's not as dogmatic. So, for example, I'm comfortable with saying something like agreeing with Nietzsche and saying something like God is dead. So I'm going to reject kind of the ontotheological God, the omni-God of classical theism. I don't think that God exists. So when I talk about God, I'm not an atheist. I could maybe pass as an atheist if somebody wanted to call me that, but I'm not one. So my language about God is more, it has a perhaps next to it, to steal Caputo's language. It has a humility about it where it's like, it's this maybe, it's this perhaps. It's more poetic. And so as someone who has a hard time buying into a lot of the strict Christian dogmatic theological claims that I grew up with, theopoetics offers me a way to still be a Christian, to still operate within the Christian tradition, to use Christian language. I might mean something different by it than other people, but it still keeps me connected and grounded within the tradition. And hopefully I can use the beauty and the power. I don't like that word, but the beauty and the power within the Christian tradition to speak of things that I think are true about God and about you and about me and the world. And ultimately, hopefully, make the world a better place, encourage me to live a better life. So that was a lot. Hopefully that made some sense.
Yeah, no, I get it. So you talk about poetry, and eventually you talk about music. Can secular music, like Johnny Cash, Taylor Swift, Eminem, could any of that help practice with this mode of engaging with the divine? Can we analyze it the same way?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think a really good example of someone who does that well is actually Brian Zond. Brian is a pastor. He's been pastoring the same church for like 40 some years. Was kind of like a Jesus hippie in like the whole Jesus movement thing. And now he refers to himself as a rock and roll Anglican, which I think is just awesome. But Brian, although Brian definitely holds to more, he's edgy, but he holds to more conservative doctrines than I would, or he's a bit more sure of them. But his book, The Wood Between Worlds, a poetic theology of the cross, is a really good example of that. He's engaging what happened on the cross without reducing it to a single atonement theory. And also he involves music. So he's a big fan of oh my goodness, why can't I think of his name right now? I'm going to be in trouble. Oh, Bob Dylan. Okay.
Oh,
I was going to say he's a huge Bob Dylan guy. So in here, he engages in music of Bob Dylan, but also he uses books. Like he engages Lord of the Rings, for example, which maybe is a bit more obvious of a connection. But yeah, I think so. And maybe one of the threads I would want to draw is like when I talk about God, I think so. I'm going to use radical theology language, and I'm pulling heavily from Caputo. Caputo says that God doesn't exist, that God insists. God is an insistence, a call, a lure, to use process language, and that God basically it's called the theology of the event. Caputo's interested in what is getting done in the name of God. And so whether or not God exists is up to you and I. The call, the invitation, the lure to actualize the divine will, things that are good and beautiful and true, is always present to us. And whether or not you and I act on it is going to, be determinative if God existed in that event or not. And so there's a lot of tie in there within the theopoetic world to something like beauty, right? The big word is axiology, the study of value, and music is beautiful, right? Hopefully, if it's good, it's beautiful. That's why we listen to it, and it's creative. Creativity is a big word in process. It's actually one of the words that's used to talk about what God is creativity. And so music can speak in a way that is poetic and again beautiful, and point at things that are true, and use language that I would argue is more true than truth because it's beautiful. And so I think that's kind of the connection. Hopefully that ties in and makes sense, because I know it's a bit abstract, but that's the idea.
Yeah. Well, you said it, not me, but do you think practicing more theopoetics rather than focusing on the abstract theology could help us overcome some of the hurdles that we have to church unity?
Absolutely. I think theopoetics is a beautiful gift to the church because it does. It's inherent. It offers humility. Like it's kind of baked in, because you're not making these dogmatic truth claims. Again, anytime I speak theologically, I like to have the word perhaps next to it, or maybe. And so I think when we're less dogmatic and can recognize that, ultimately, if we're go super orthodox, God is ineffable. We, like the mystics, have spoken this way forever. There's apophatic and cataphatic, negative and positive theology. The apophatic tradition is like, we can't say anything actually true about God because God is infinite and we're just operating out of finite language. And so anytime we speak of God, it's like a finger pointing to the moon. And so our theology is the finger, and we shouldn't, mistake that for the thing itself, the moon. So there's a humility in that. In the same way, Meister Eckhart, who was a Christian monk and mystic, had this beautiful prayer that fits within theopoetics nicely and radical theology as well, where he says, God, rid me of God. And so, like, if you would write that out maybe to help it make sense, he's like, big G God, rid me of. So, like, this big G God, rid me of God. So it's just a recognition that our language is finite, it's infinite, it's not perfect. And so I think that breeds a humility for the church. And I also think too, to extend your question a bit and elaborate on it, I actually think theopoetics, radical theology included, and process for that matter, is a helpful tool for engaging inter-religious dialogue, which I think is really important because we kill each other over religion all the time. It's happening in the world currently.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I don't know, if you take something like theopoetics and come together with your, as a Christian, I come together with my Muslim neighbor and recognize that we're both speaking poetically, trying to get at ultimacy, and can come, to agreement on something like, oh, well, love is an ultimate value, right? I mean, I tend to believe God is love, big L, love. Then it can again infuse with humility, recognize that we're working towards the same thing and that our language is more poetic than anything else. And I think it can bring together people of different faith backgrounds as well. So I think it's the church and other faiths.
All right. What about the literalists? Can literalists practice theopoetics at all?
Yeah. I mean, I would think so, because I mean, so you say you're reading the Bible literally. There's poetry within the Bible, like a ton of it, like way a lot. The Book of Psalms, right, is an example, or you have poetry weaved in, even in like some of Paul's letters and things like that. So, I think absolutely, you could. I think where you would get hung up on is like, I don't know, if you take a literal reading of like, I don't know, Jesus walked on water, then maybe someone operating within a more theopoetic world would take that poetically. A literalist would probably be like, no, Jesus literally walked on the water. So there'd be a disagreement there. But I think you can read the Bible literally and then speak theologically in a way that is still poetic, if you're willing to, I don't know, have that, again, humility. I think it would be more difficult. I think people who are inclined to read more literally might not be super thrilled about something like theopoetics, which is fine. I don't want to take anybody's like meaning and faith away from them, but for me, theopoetics works. It is what keeps me hanging out with Christianity and this Jesus guy. So, yeah.
I don't know. I've said that a million times. I'll say it a million more times probably before I die, if I start now. Pride is just easily the biggest thing that gets in the way of Christian unity, any kind of unity. Honestly, most people's true sense of self. Pride is the devil. Big not fan of pride. Not like that. But yeah, humility is super huge. Not like that. So, okay. So as far as you go, Rethinking Faith is your show. What episodes, interviews have you recently had that you're just like super excited about, super ready to share, super ready to talk about?
Yeah, sure. Let me pull up my feed real quick, because they're a lot of fun. I mean, so I really enjoyed an episode I put out recently called Undoing Conquest with Kate Common. Kate's book was fantastic. It engages Hebrew origin stories and like the Canaanite conquest narratives, and is like, it's super good. It's great because I have an issue with genocide, and God
Mhm.
commanding it. And so
Mhm.
Kate's book engages that. Um, I have been doing this like 20-ish cues episode format for a while now that I sprinkle in, maybe once a month, once every 2 months. And the one that I did with Jared Bias recently was a lot of fun. So that came out. Let's see. I did like this one was fun. Deconstructing the Imago Dei with Dr. Christy Whaley. Her book was fantastic. It's called Wounded Images.
Mhm.
And it looks like this. And it's revisioning the Imago Dei through the reading of Jean Rhys interwar novels. So basically, she um, recognizes that, again, theology is contextual, and that a lot of our classic understandings of the image of God and what that means has been written by educated white dudes. And that means that the image of God looks very much like them, and it doesn't often include everybody. So Whaley, in her book, uses feminist critiques and then also womanist critiques of the Imago Dei, and then also brings in literature. So again, theopoetics, and engages the theology through the lens of literature, through these really crazy stories of people who have been abused and these kind of things, and then comes up with a reimagining of the Imago Dei that can include all of humanity. So
Yeah.
that episode was super fun.
Yeah, that sounds
Yeah.
sick. I love a
So
good hit piece on Thomas Aquinas.
yeah, well, there you go. So that's just a couple, but there's so many fun things on there.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
definitely. If you're listening, check out Rethinking Faith. Good friend. Love this guy. Smart kid. But you and I, we met in person for the first time
mhm,
at Theology Beer Camp,
we did.
which I'm pretty sure. I don't remember meeting before that. But it's coming up again. It's a couple months away. So
Hmm.
let's talk about it. What do you love about Theology Beer Camp? What are you most excited for this year? Learn from?
Yeah, I mean, I just love the people at Theology Beer Camp. I So for like listeners, I used to be a pastor. I served in vocational ministry for just shy of 6 years. Um, and I had to step away from ministry ultimately because the first church that I worked at, I experienced really not great stuff. Like things I had to go to therapy for, where I was told, like, oh, you've experienced emotional abuse, spiritual abuse, verbal abuse, borderline physical abuse. So that kind of wrecked things for me. And then on top of that, um, it just basically I read a lot and experienced, again, what's being called deconstruction, and just felt that it wasn't healthy for me to be a pastor anymore, at least at that stage in my life. So I stopped doing that. I became a professional brewer, started making beer, did that for about 3 years. But ultimately, all that to say, I lost my community when I had to leave the church. And Theology Beer Camp um, gives me that community again that I miss, honestly, and that I long for. And it's a lot of people who have similar stories, that have similar questions, that are just trying to figure out, what it means to be human together. So I love that. I love getting to hang out with people. I mean, day drinking in church is always fun, but the
It's true.
community aspect, and then also I mean, I'm a nerd, so I love the different like keynote speakers and stuff that they bring in, and getting to hang out with them and interact, right? Because they don't, Trip has a rule. We don't really have like a green room or something like that at Theology Beer Camp. So the different speakers are just out and about with
Yeah, they're
everybody. And so if you want to go talk to them or have a
just
beer or
hanging
grab
out.
lunch or whatever, yeah, hang out. It's really
Yeah,
cool. Um, so it's a big
yeah,
community thing for me. That's what I'm excited about.
yeah. No, it's super exciting. It's so cool to just. I personally really enjoy being the dumbest person in every room I walk into. So Theology Beer Camp is just like a weekend of that. It's super good time, and it's just cannot run out of things to do.
Hmm.
Just find a person and start talking to them. you're gonna learn something at Theology Beer Camp because you might be talking to one of like the most renowned theologians of our time. They're just
Right.
they might just be hanging out in not in the back, but they sit in the front.
Do
But
you want to hear a funny story about that
yeah,
from last year? So there was a philosopher, theologian there, Catholic theologian from Germany,
yes,
named Godehard Bruntrop. And forgive me, German listeners, because I probably just totally screwed that up. But anyway, Godehard, I knew he was going to be talking about like uh, basically philosophy of mind. He's what's called often a panpsychist, or I prefer
hmm
pan-experientialist. And so I was going to be interviewing him. And so I went up and introduced myself. I was like, oh, hey, Godehard. Like, I know I'm going to be interviewing you. You're going to be doing like the whole process and panpsychism bit. I heard you're like that, like you really like consciousness of mind stuff or philosophy of mind stuff. And he was just like, yeah, me and, listed 3 other people. He was like, we're kind of the people who like came up with panpsychism. And I
yeah,
felt like a total idiot.
yeah. No, I was. This
I'm
is. I
asking
did
the
the
guy if
same
he
thing.
likes the thing he invented.
I did this. He was working on something and like walking from the main hall to like the geek stage. There was like a little desk in that little lobby right there, and I didn't. I
Mhm.
didn't know what he looked like. I just have heard about him. So I see just a dude sitting here working on something, typing something. It looks like he's thinking. So I'm not really doing anything else. I walk over there to see what's up, see if I could help. And I'm like, hey, what are you working on? And then he starts talking. I was like, oh no, this is Goathard. I can't help him. So I was like, oh, you know what? You must be Goathard. Nice to meet you. Uh, I gotta go.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was so funny. It's like, oh, it's like the worst possible result.
Yeah. Well, he was very kind and gracious.
He
And
is. He's super nice.
yeah, he had such blunt, like stereotypical, like dry German humor. Uh, it's like threw people off when he was
Yeah,
speaking. It was pretty fun.
yeah, it's so funny. Oh my gosh, no, beer camp is so cool. This year, I don't know if you know this yet. You probably do, but not many people do. Kevin Max, former member of DC Talk, if you're a real Jesus freak, is going to be at Theology Beer Camp this year. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
if you're not going and you want to go, our code is Holeshire. That's WHOLESHIRE, all caps, for $50 off your ticket. That's October 17th through the 19th in Denver, Colorado. Super fun event. Literally, it's there's nothing that compares to it, really, in my opinion, except, like when you were like 10 at church camp. That's kind of what Theology Beer Camp feels like. Just a little different with beer. But
Yeah.
definitely not an event that's easy to miss. It's so worth going.
It's almost as if a former youth minister that is a super nerd invites all of their super nerd friends to a giant youth group event that's for adults. Oh,
Yeah.
actually, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, it's so fun.
Yeah.
But you're in the know. You're in the circle. You talk to a lot of people. You run your own show. Are there any questions that you hope you get asked when you guest on podcasts or talk to other ministries that just don't come up very often?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this since we, talked about doing this interview. And that's hard. I really don't know things that I wish people would ask.
Yeah. This is our
Um,
cheat question.
yeah, I
If
don't.
we can't come up with a really good one, we're like, man, what do they want?
Yeah, like I don't know, because I mean I tend to be pretty open and honest, like probably to the point of oversharing. Um, so I don't know if there's ever been something I wish somebody asked and didn't. I mean, I love the things that I like talking about are like process thinking, radical theology, theopoetics, the kind of stuff we've been talking about. Um, I wish more people that are to my right theologically would ask me about how any of my theology or things like that shapes and informs how I live my life. Because
Mm,
often I tend to just get written off by people more so to my right, as like, oh, you're not really a Christian or you don't count or something like that. And I wish that people would ask, like, okay, well, like, what does this theology do for you? Why do you why do you spend so much time reading and podcasting and trying to put forth more beautiful um, conceptions and understandings of the divine and of the Christian tradition? Um, because yeah, I mean, I clearly care about it. But I'm not out here trying to like wreck people. I'm trying to make the world a better place, hopefully.
right.
Uh, you know, one
What
listener
would,
at a time. But
what would you say to those people?
um, yeah, I mean, I would try to point to things like, the Sermon on the Mount and my my entire ethic, my entire hermeneutical lens that I do theology through is love. Um, I'll steal this phrase from Tom Ord, who's a good friend of mine and an amazing theologian and scholar. Ord has said, "I'm a lover first and a Christian second," and love informs his Christianity, and that's not in spite of his Christian convictions and beliefs, but because of them. He thinks he's compelled to do it that way because of it, and I agree with him. Um, like the example of Jesus, I can't get away from it, dude. I mean, I have days where I don't know if there uh, is an ontological referent that we call ultimate. Like if there's a God, I don't know. But Jesus still is inspiring, is still motivating. I still try to live my life in light of the teachings and life and person of Jesus. I try to love my neighbor and maybe sometimes love my enemy.
Mhm.
when So it's inspiring. And then on days when I do still posit, when I'm feeling more confident, I'm like, yes, there's a God. Those are my more processy days when I talk about, God being present in and through all things at all times and calling us, inviting us into the actualization of the good and the beautiful and true. Like that's, I don't know. Aaron Simmons says faith is risk in a direction and asks us to contemplate what's worthy of our finitude and living as if the Jesus story is true is worthy of my finitude because hopefully it makes me a better person. It helps me treat people around me better. Hopefully it makes the world a little bit better of a place. And if there's nothing after this, if I lived in the footsteps of Jesus, it seems worth the risk to me. And hopefully all the other stuff is true, but I don't know. So that's what I would say.
All right.
Yeah.
So, uh, one thing we always like to do before wrapping up is to ask our guest if they had to provide one tangible action to help engender Christian unity, church unity. What is one practical thing that our listeners could go do right now?
I would say go find a physical activity that you do with somebody who uh, is radically different from you, theologically, politically, whatever. So, and what I mean physical activity, I mean like some kind of way of service. So like go serve in a soup kitchen or I don't know, whatever. You get the idea. And that stems from a recent experience I had. I uh, somehow had the honor and privilege of being the keynote speaker for a regional youth conference in North Carolina. And at that youth camp, one of the leaders there, his name's Maddie. Shout out Maddie. Uh, Phenomenal human being. Maddie, very, very different from me theologically, politically. I'm a hardcore. I don't like the word pacifist. I have a nonviolent ethic. Maddie was a former Marine who was blown up when he was 19 years old. in active combat, destroyed his body. He's a below the knee amputee. And him and I worked in this youth camp together, and both of our goals was the same: to let these kids know that they are known, that they are loved, that they are seen, and that they belong. And we had really great talks at night on the back porch when all the kids were asleep about theology and politics and all this kind of stuff. And we don't agree on a lot, but we became really good friends because of the actions that we're doing together, which was to serve other people and love them and let them know that they are seen, loved, and known by God, and that the truest thing about them is that they're God's beloved. And so that I gained a friend who I would not seek out. And so I don't know how we go about doing that, but if you can find somebody you very much disagree with and go try to do something good for the world with them, I think it'll change your perspective.
Yeah.
Because you'll see actions speak louder than words, as the stupid trope goes.
Yep. So you heard it, Pentecostals. Yeah, actions don't speak at all. But speaking is an action. But you heard it, Pentecostals. Go work at the Methodist soup kitchen in town.
There we
Get
go.
out there, make some friends. If we did that, what would change?
I think what would change is that people would realize that we have more in common than we do different. That we are all just humans trying to figure out what the heck that even means. And that specifically as Christians within the church, we love the same thing. We're trying, like, even though I disagree with them, my more conservative buddies, who are like hardcore Calvinist, I'm the opposite spectrum of them, but we both love Jesus. I think that's true about them. I think that's true about me. And so I think you will recognize that that unity exists. And when we come together, things can happen, things can change. And so it helps us, like Christianity. One of my qualms with it is that, and it's not all Christians, but there's this bifurcation. Thanks, Immanuel Kant. But there's this bifurcation where we think like this, the world doesn't necessarily really matter. What matters is like saving souls and getting them up into heaven. And that like, so this earth is kind of whatever. But first off, that's Gnosticism. The church has rightfully rejected that as heresy throughout church history. But also it again abdicates our responsibility, to tie into the beginning of the conversation. And so when we can come together and actually do tangible things, to use very Christian language, to build the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven, then we kind of recognize that, like, okay, maybe our theology, although it's important, it's not the most important thing. What's important is what's happening. It's the person in front of us who is made in the image of God, that is known, seen, and loved. And we're here to serve them and to serve each other. So I think that's what could change. So we can maybe get some shit done.
All right. So, you've done the show. We end with our God moment before we get into our outro. I will go first, but we just ask if there's a moment where you saw God recently. Big one for you. That whether it was a blessing or a challenge or a moment of worship, whatever it could be. For me, my God moment, I have recently been hit with like the realization that I am only going to get out as much as I give in. Which I feel like I've always been that kind of a person who's willing to give, but I don't know. I feel like I lost my way for a long time. And if I'm not giving in myself, my own needs to others, I'm not going to get any of them. I'm not going to see my friends, my family, not going to get anything out of work, my business, this podcast. I don't know why. I feel like I had lost it all, and then realized a couple of days ago, like, wow, that's not how life works. I have to give up of myself or nothing gets done. Maybe that's the humility talking. from the outside point of view. But
Hmm.
I don't know. That was super big for me. I don't know when I lost that, but it's nice to feel it again.
Yeah, that's a good one, man. God moment for me. I mean, I think just the experience that I had at camp in North Carolina a couple weeks ago, just being with those students who, come from diverse backgrounds, and are there together, and to hear them speak about the love and friendship and belonging that they find at camp, to see them, uh, I don't know, ask really good questions and, um, come together and love one another. And I don't know, like there was students there who um, were like on the spectrum or had some severe social anxieties, and like those kids weren't treated as outcasts, but they were welcomed and celebrated and loved. Um, and also, I was invited to this freaking camp, and I was very much myself. I could say, the kind of things that I actually think and feel, and I was celebrated and welcomed and loved. And so I felt those moments are when I believe God exists, um, and they give me hope. And so that experience overall was a big God moment for me. I felt, closer to God than I have in a while, and it's deeply meaningful. So that's a big one
we
for
love
me.
those. I'm of the opinion that most camps are good these days.
Yeah.
Just to get out of yourself and get up to something. But that's great. I'd love to hear that. If you're listening, please consider sharing this with a friend, share with an enemy, share with cousins, especially those last two. We get a lot more mileage out of that. Also, if you feel like if you like us that much, I mean, Josh and I, and also this one, we do have merch. We update that. Not divinely inspired to be the church Ministries Podcast Network on the website in the show notes to find more thoughtful Christian podcasts. Josh, is there anything you'd like to say, plug before you go?
Well, first, thank you so much for the opportunity to come hang out with you guys. I'm excited to see you all at Theology Beer Camp. Again, podcast is Rethinking Faith. You can find it anywhere podcasts are found. I have an Instagram feed at rethinking_faith. Come hang out. I respond to DMs and always like to have nerdy theological conversations, especially with people who disagree with me, as long as they're not jerks.
Yeah, I'm okay with the jerk
I like
part
having a
sometimes.
conversation. Yeah.
Every once in a while, it's nice.
Yeah.
But we hope you enjoyed it. Next week, we're going to have on Pastor Derek Seagrave of Sanctuary Church in Anchorage, Alaska, and that will be our farthest eastern, I think, because I'm counting the Australians, so I'm going west. Or west, I switched that around, whatever. I'm dumb. Never eat soggy waffles. But we're going to have Keister Bruin on to discuss his book on pirates, AI, and the church.
Heck yes.
What a topic.
All right. That's fun.
We're going to be taking a few weeks off before starting our What's Next series, where we're going to be interviewing church leaders about what happens after stuff like marriage, divorce, church rehoming, and deconstruction. And finally, at the end of season 1, Francis Chan will be on the show. Maybe. The show's not ending until Francis Chan agrees to be on. And then we start season 2, and we start shooting for the Pope.
Oh, shoot. There you go.
Yeah. By then, we'll probably have a different Pope, and hopefully he'll speak English. That would make it a little bit more convenient.
Make it help. Brush up on your Italian.
I can learn Italian. Sure. He's a busy guy. I'm not. I can learn Italian. But thank you for being here. Busy dude. Talking to some busy dudes. We miss Josh. We love Josh. I'll see y'all next week. I will see you at the very latest in October.